Hello, welcome. This is episode 73 of Yoga Research and Beyond. We are talking about text neck today and neck pain. We'll talk about what text neck is and if text neck really does cause neck pain. I'm your co-host, Ariana, founder of Yoga Research and Beyond. I'm a yoga teacher, strength trainer in New York City, and co-founder of New York Stretch.
I'm Jules, and I'm co-hosting with Ariana today. And I teach mostly yoga biomechanics in the form of continuing education and advanced yoga teacher training. And research literacy is a big part of all of my programs, which is why we're here together.
Jumping right into the paper. It's a pre-proof, but we'll go into what that means. The title is Neck Pain and Text Neck Using Hill's Criteria of Causation, a Scoping Review. It's from the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies. It's by Paula Auxiliadora, I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry, Rezende and her colleagues. I think this research was done in Brazil, which explains my inability to pronounce the names. And this was done in December of 2024. As I mentioned, it's a journal pre-proof. Jules, what's a pre-proof?
Wow. A pre-proof generally means that the paper has gone through peer review, but it isn't like typeset and formatted and properly edited. So you often see typos and other errors. And I will say that for being a pre-proof, I was bracing myself because I've seen some pretty bad ones. And this one was pretty good. I found it really readable and understandable without a lot of conflicting statements. We once read a pre-proof in my mentoring program, and we didn't realize it was pre-proof because we just kind of overlooked it and we were just talking and we felt like we were being the peer reviewers. We kept finding mistake after mistake. It was really interesting. But this one seems to be pretty good. Usually what you'll see is like in this one, there's a lot of weird spacing. It hasn't been formatted. It's not all condensed. It's not really ready for publication, but it does have a DOI and it can be cited. And generally, once it's ready, they will replace it with the final paper. It's just something that we can do now that we have the internet. We can just say, hey, it's ready while we get everything organized. And you might see it also called like an article in press. That's another name for it. So you might see that.
Got it. So I also thought it was really readable. I found that too. The purpose of this study, this is the question that they ask is, does text neck cause neck pain? Text neck, what it is basically is just the position your neck goes into when you're looking down at your smartphone or device. So it involves some neck flexion and it's associated with poor posture. The way that they did this research, it's a scoping review, which means it's like a broad overview rather than a detailed analysis or like a statistical analysis of specific studies. One description I saw of a scoping review is that it provides a roadmap. It's like a roadmap of research, which I like that. That was helpful. So the way that once they looked at all of these studies in this scoping review, they had like 21 studies that they pulled together and they looked at them all and used what's known as Hill's criteria of causation, which I had never heard of before. And it's used a lot in research to determine if there is something that is causing something else. It was developed by Sir Austin Bradford Hill back in 1965 to observe those associations. And there are 9 criteria in the guidelines. I'm not going to go over all of them unless you want me to mention all of them, Jules, but I'll mention 4 of them. One is like involving time. So did the cause, or what you think is the cause, did it happen before the effect? That's important. Sounds really obvious, but that's an important one. How strong is the association? So an example of a strong association is smoking and lung cancer. Another one is consistency. is the same association observed in many populations at different times and different circumstances. And then another one I thought was important is gradient or dose response, which is if it's the cause, you would think higher exposure to that cause would cause more of that effect. So that's the fourth one that I thought was most interesting. But there are 5 others.
Yeah. I think biological plausibility is also a good one, just like, especially for text neck. Like, is it plausible that having your head down could cause tissue damage? Is that biologically plausible? But I think we'll go over the rest of them kind of as we go through the results or what their determination was in the paper. So you'll get some exposure to them. I think if it's okay, I'll just do a little riff on correlation, association, and causation just to make sense of all this. Like, why is this important? Because it's really easy to understand that there's an association and then think that there could be a causation, and they're not really the same thing. So I found a little blurb in Nature, which is a great publication. And it said, correlation implies association, but not causation. And conversely, causation implies association, but not correlation. And that's a lot to wrap your head around, because you're like, what's really the difference? Especially because we use association and correlation as the same thing in everyday colloquial language. But technically, they're not quite the same thing when it comes to statistical analysis. And so, like, as Ariana mentioned, cause and effect is a very specific relationship. Something needs to precede the variable that is the cause, needs to precede the outcome, which is the effect. And so just because 2 things happen doesn't automatically imply that. So let me give an example of association. It's a very general relationship, and it's usually somewhat dependent. But dependent doesn't mean causation either. So the association, let me give an example. This was the one they used in the Nature. People who drink 4 cups of coffee a day tend to have less incidence of skin cancer. Okay, so that's an association. There's a variable, 4 cups of coffee a day. And then there's, that's the dependent variable, right? And the outcome is less skin cancer or more infrequent incidence of skin cancer. And so it's easy to think coffee is a cause for less skin cancer, right? It's easy to think that. But the reality is it's probably because coffee drinkers have office jobs and spend more time indoors. Right? But it is still dependent. So there is an association that is dependent, but it's not a cause and effect. And that's what I think is so hard for us to wrap our head around, especially in today's world with news and social media. So you really have to step back and think about it. Okay, so now let's go to correlation, because a correlation is not just an association or causation either. A correlation is where 2 variables, and you mentioned this is part of being Hill's criteria as well, that 2 variables, they have a relationship with each other. Like an example would be like an increasing relationship or a decreasing trend. So what you would need for there to be a correlation would be that if you drink 5 or 6 or 7 cups of coffee a day, you would have less and less and less skin cancer. That's a correlation. It still doesn't tell you that coffee is a cause of reducing your chance of skin cancer, but that would be a correlation. So it's more that there's 2 variables involved, and that the 2 of them have a trend that is reflected of the other, versus an association is just more of like this dependent thing, which is, again, not causation. Right. So I know it's so overwhelming, but I think in TextNet, that's why I love this paper, because it's so easy to go on social media and see text neck with red flames shooting out the back of your neck, and that it's a cause of pain. And so just because 2 things are happening, right, doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other. So, could there be other factors of using your phone all the time, social factors of using your phone all the time, that are contributing to pain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The concept of text neck always makes me smile because we've been reading for centuries with our heads down.
I know. Well, that's one of the criteria in Hill's criteria of causation. So it's an analogous example. So if we look at, and we're just kind of jumping ahead, but that's fine, no problem. But if we look at other ways that our heads are down, reading newspapers, mashing corn to make tortillas, doing laundry, working in the fields. So if we look at analogous situations where our head is in flexion, do we have the same incidence? And so it, spoiler alert, it did not pass the criteria test for that one. For that one.
Yeah. Here's another spoiler alert.
Yeah. Let's just get into it. It doesn't have to be in order.
I just love this. None of the criteria were met.
Yes. Yes. Not a single one of the criteria were met.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the funniest
Let's go through them.
Yeah. The first one is time, temporality. So there was no evidence showing that text neck preceded the neck pain.
Mm-hmm.
There were weak associations. So there was no consistency between the links of text neck and neck pains. There was no biological plausibility.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one.
Yeah. The research on spinal mechanics suggested that our necks can tolerate much more load than text neck posture creates. And the dose response, the gradient, like there was the more exposure people had to text neck did not correlate with more pain. So those are the 5 that I think those are the 5
you were interesting.
Yeah.
On the biological plausibility, they wrote, none of the studies presented convincingly verified that the habit of flexing the neck while using a smartphone could cause tissue damage. But when you see the social media meme, it's so easy to fall into the logical fallacy, right?
Yeah.
Some of the others were consistency. So there was no repetition of finding in different populations and locations and over time. And there was no consistency in any of the studies. So that was another one that was out. Another one of them is specificity. It's like, so they were saying positioning and cervical flexion is not characterized as the only capable thing that reproduces neck pain. So that was another one of the important criteria. It has to be so specific to this. It was like, lots of things cause neck pain. So like, how can we blame just being in flexion? Let's see, you covered the next few. What else was there? Coherence. That was a really good one. So they basically brought up the biopsychosocial model, saying that it's widely recognized that neck pain is a multifactorial condition. So coherence kind of had an overlap with specificity. And then the analogy one that we already talked about. And I can't say the word analogy without laughing because we were on a trip recently and had a friend doing a crossword puzzle. And it's just a whole inside joke about the pronunciation. But we will have that forever between us.
Shout out. Yeah.
I already mentioned it, the analogy, right? That there's all kinds of other activities, knitting. We're not seeing research papers saying knitting and neck pain and,
Yeah. Yeah. So if it's not the text neck, what is it? So Jules mentioned the biopsychosocial model. So they're thinking factors like stress levels, lifestyle, and psychosocial elements could be involved. And so, with someone who's got neck pain, don't assume, oh, hey, are you on your phone a lot?
Well, and the real thing is someone that has neck pain might be on their phone all the time because we're all on our phone all the time. But just because they're both happening doesn't mean that one causes the other,
Yeah, it could be the stress that we get when we're reading.
Yes.
Things going on in the world.
It could be not getting outside and getting fresh air. It could be, it could be a million things. It's not the phone's fault.
Yeah, it's not the phone's fault. So, So this, I thought this was a fun, cool study. I liked it.
Yeah.
Any limitations that you thought were?
I didn't really look at those because I was just kind of focusing on their technique. They basically said it was just, they have a paragraph on it, but basically that it's, doesn't look at statistics, like they were just doing an analysis, just a scoping review, of course.
Yeah.
And that we're always limited by the type of research that's available,
Yeah.
I don't
Isn't
think
to
there's
think that they wouldn't have been able to do a statistical meta-analysis just because of the nature of the research that's available on this. So but I think they were so straightforward in the type of review that it wasn't really a limitation, like for me anyway. But I think that's it.
I think so too.
Okay, cool.
Great episode.
All right, nice. Another one in the bucket. Thank you for joining, everybody. And please subscribe, share with your fellow yoga teachers. And let's keep the conversation going about how we can use research to inform and inspire our teaching. See you next time.